We are getting ready to embark upon what I believe is going to be a very productive, enlightening, entertaining, and absolutely educational evening. My name is Dr. Sally Stone, and I am the founder and owner of The Well. My partner in crime is my husband, Mario. Well, good trouble, as the late singer would say. Good trouble. We want to welcome you to The Well. We are super excited about the opportunity to collaborate with Swan Forum, and we want to thank sincerely AJ, and of course Anna Rivera and the Puerto Rican and Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We want to thank the vendors for here, and most absolutely LPD, thank you for being here, and everybody in the audience. This is one of the things that as The Well, we have been super excited about. Just a little bit about The Well. We are a public-private partnership with the City of Lakeland's Office of Economic Development. And we submitted a proposal. And in that proposal, our goal and our mission was to provide training, education, support services to businesses, nonprofits, entrepreneurs, startups, and anyone that has a vested interest in making Lakeland the best place to live, work, and play. That is our goal. And so to be able to host this event on tonight is absolutely within our mission and our vision. I think you're going to enjoy it, and we look forward to having more opportunities such as this. So without further ado, because we have both of our participants here and ready, and I'm just excited. So buckle up, sit back, and get ready. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Dr. Sally, thank you for having us. Good evening, my name is Allison Foley-Rothrock. I'll be your moderator for this evening. I am a member of Swan Forums. I'm also the founder of a group called the Red Tent Initiative. We work with survivors of abuse and exploitation in our communities. We do arts events to raise money and raise awareness. It's basically to help people rebuild their lives after they're escaping any form of domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking. And we're very proud to be here, proud to partner with Swan Forums. We, more than anything, believe in having tough conversations in a civil way, because that's important for advancing our community and solving the world's biggest and toughest problems. So, without further ado, I'm going to explain to everyone a little bit about the process for tonight's debate. Each of the sides, pro-choice and pro-life, will have 10 minutes to give their opening, 5 minutes to cross-examine their opponent, 10 minutes for rebuttal, 5 minutes for closing arguments. After that, we'll have a 30-minute open opportunity for everyone in the audience to ask their questions. Civilly, of course. We ask that everyone report themselves with civility. That's the main goal here, right? To have these tough conversations without getting at each other's throats. And so, without further ado, I will introduce our speakers. Alberto AJ Rodriguez, on my left, will be our pro-choice advocate for tonight. He is a former Lakeland City Commission candidate, the president and founder of Swan Forums, and has served on several government boards. He is a self-described political activist and armchair philosopher. As the chief architect of Swan Forums Inc., Rodriguez believes in leading by example, and this is why he has elected to debate in tonight's civil discourse. On my right, Hardam Tripathi, an attorney in the community and representing the pro-life side of things. Prior to launching his own law firm, Hardam Tripathi served as a management consultant and lobbyist. Tripathi devotes a substantial portion of his time as an immigration attorney, advocating for the best practices in immigration law space, something we have in common. I also work in immigration law. Tripathi also speaks with members of Congress regularly to advocate for better funding for public health initiatives and Veterans Affairs. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Welcome. Thank you, everyone. I'll be keeping time as well, so as you keep an eye on things, just raise a finger. I won't yell at you or jump up or anything unless it's absolutely necessary. And I'll turn the floor over to you, AJ. Thank you.
Check, check. All right, it works. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight, for being part of our very first Swan Debates for charity event. I also want to thank our sponsors, our donors, and our partners for helping to make this event happen in the first place. And I especially want to thank Allison Foley-Rothrock for taking the time out of her busy schedule to moderate the debate tonight. I also want to thank my good friend, Mr. Tripathi, for being willing to debate a controversial topic like abortion rights on a live stage. And last but not least, I'd like to give a very special thank you to the incredibly talented team here at the Well for having the guts to host an event like this at their venue. Okay, they are truly doing our community service by helping to facilitate conversations like these. And they deserve all the recognition in the world for it. Anyways, with all that said, I think it would be prudent for me to properly frame this debate before I give all of you my opening arguments. You see, when we debate abortion rights, what we're essentially arguing over are the answers to two very distinct questions. We're talking about the question of public policy and the question of morality and ethics. Does abortion access actually benefit society as a whole? Does it promote the general welfare and the health care of the citizenry? Is abortion morally permissible? Is it even ethical? Now, it's true to say that law and ethics do intersect in many ways, but it's also true to say that they diverge in many ways as well. Just because a specific law makes for good public policy does not make it ethical. And just because something is ethical does not then mean it ought to be the law of the land. Case in point, I think we can all agree that sheltering a homeless individual is a moral act. I think we can all agree on that. But I think we can also all agree that nobody should be legally compelled to shelter a stranger without their consent in their home. Now, it's important to understand this because it's actually possible to reach different answers to each of these questions. It is possible to personally hold abortion as being, quote, immoral, while still viewing it to be a societal necessity. Plenty of pro-choicers do that every day. Be that as it may, what I'm going to be arguing to all of you tonight is that the pro-choice position is actually the best answer to both of these questions. And I'm going to be doing that by making three core arguments. One that I will be saving for my rebuttal for time constraint reasons. So with that said, allow me to introduce you to what I call the philanthropic argument. The philanthropic argument is the argument that posits that the pro-choice position benefits society as a whole more so than the pro-life position. And I happen to believe the case is so strong for the pro-choice position that I don't necessarily need to cite any specific studies, but I can guarantee you I will be pointing some out for you. Instead, what I need to do really is just pose to all of you just a couple handful of questions for which the answers to these questions are self-evident. Simply ponder. Does society benefit from having more orphans? Does society benefit from having more single-parent homes? Does society benefit from having more parents paying child support? Does society benefit from higher teenage pregnancy rates? Does society benefit from having more women needlessly die because they can't get the life-saving abortion procedures that they need? Does society benefit in general when you force people to have children they're not ready for or that they don't want? Do the children themselves benefit from any of this? You see, the answers to these questions matter tremendously. And yet the answers to all of these questions are painfully obvious. This is precisely why you rarely hear pro-life advocates make a philanthropic argument. This is why they assert that the only question that matters in this debate is the question of morality and ethics, when that's certainly not the case. And since this is ultimately a debate about public policy, about legislation, then we ought to go with the position that best answers the question of public policy, which is the pro-choice position. So we could actually just end the event tonight, right now, with a clear winner, but it's not really likely to let go of a captive audience that easily. Anyways, setting aside that terrible joke, let's just, for argument's sake, grant the premise that the fetus does have the right to life. Let's just grant the premise for the sake of argument. That alone would not justify the pro-life position. There is yet another question that needs to be answered before the pro-life position can actually be validated. And that question happens to be whether or not the right to life is the right to a woman's body. I think a simple thought experiment will suffice in order to actually demonstrate this moral dilemma. Imagine we have a young boy named Chad. Now imagine that Chad is dying of an incredibly rare disease, and that the only salvation from this disease is to be physically attached to another individual for 9 months. Now envision that in this scenario, the government happens to view Chad's right to life as being so valuable that not only can it not be violated, but it cannot be neglected. Given this information, the government and its monopoly on force takes Chad and forcibly attaches him to a young boy named Clyde without Clyde's consent. Now simply think about it. Do you agree with the government's decision in that situation? Should Chad be attached to Clyde without Clyde's consent? Now, if you answer yes, then you shouldn't have problems with a vaccine mandate. You shouldn't have a problem with mask mandates. And you certainly shouldn't have a problem if I am dying and I need your kidney and the government takes it from you without consent. Now, if you disagree with the government's actions in this thought experiment, then you can't be pro-life. Because by actually saying no in this situation, what you are doing is that you are affirming that the right to life is not the right to a woman's body. Now, there are plenty of complexities and nuances that we can talk about during the Q&A regarding the specific thought experiment. I can guarantee you it is a fair comparison. That said, more is needed in order to justify the violation of bodily autonomy rights for the sake of women. More is needed in order to justify imposing positive rights on the fetus that demand the mother to make a sacrifice for the sake of another entity that is living inside of her and absorbing her nutrients without consent. It also cannot go without saying that consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy. Now, I don't have the time to explain why, but I'm perfectly willing to elaborate on that, either during our cross-examination or during the Q&A. Simply put, even if my good friend manages to convince you that the fetus has the right to life, he still has all of his work left ahead of him. Because at the end of the day, the right to life just is not the right to a woman's body, especially in a country where I can't even take a dead person's organs in order to save my life without prior consent. With that said, I want to thank you for listening to my little monologue here, and I'm going to yield my time now.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How are y'all? How's everyone doing today? Pretty good? Good. Glad we're here today. My name is Attorney Hardam Tripathi from Trip Law. I want to just say thank you so much to my colleague here, AJ, who got me involved in this debate. I'm obviously basically attacking the pro-life aspect of it. Want to really say thank you to the Well for sponsoring Dr. Stone, wherever you are, ma'am, but thank you so much for your time. Had a wonderful opportunity to actually meet a lot of people here today. A little bit about myself. I'm not going to give you a whole monologue about all that, because what's actually important today is having a civil discourse getting involved in this community and making sure we push that needle forward. Whether we are on all sides of the spectrum or not, we need to discuss abortion. These are things that most people don't like to talk about. It's what we always go at the dinner table. What is it always about, right? Don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. Well, we do need to talk about it. That's why we're here today, and we're having the opportunity, a forum, a very civilized forum, and a lot of great people here who are interested in this topic. So I just want to say thank you not only to the Well, thank you to AJ, thank you to Swan Forums, thank you to our law enforcement officers who are here supporting us as well. Thank you for all the wonderful food and all of that. We have so many good people here that are willing to really discuss this very key, important issue. So a little bit before I get started in the actual substantive nature of the actual debate and actually talk about what we're about to go into, a little bit about myself. My master's degree is from the University of Florida. I'm also an adjunct professor. I used to be an adjunct professor at UF. My colleague here, he came from a side of public policy. I was also a lobbyist in DC for the United Nations. We worked on a lot of healthcare related issues. I also did my master's in pharmacy, and so I understand the pharmaceutical aspects of it. And I'm also an attorney, so my goal is to also show you the legal and constitutional implications of it, and not the moral and religious, because everyone can argue moral and religious. There's a very gray area with that. But when you talk about law, you talk about policy, you talk about science, you talk about public health, these are things that these are things that cannot be disputed. We all know what a cell is. We understand what meiosis is. We understand what mitosis is. These are things that are literally what happens in a woman's body. You're probably wondering, there's two men on the stage, not a woman. I'm sure I'm going to get that argument, that rebuttal. I'm looking forward to that. But we're going to talk about that. And one big thing is, look, we're not going to talk about the morality aspect of it, but we're just going to talk about, from my understanding, my life values and views. All of y'all have a very emotional but also logical perplexion of this kind of topic. So today I understand that this is a topic that is very highly debated all across the country. It is a topic that we also understand that has a lot of high emotions in it. I'm not here to condemn any woman in her body and tell her that, this is what's going on with your body and I have every right as a man to do that. We're not doing that here. We all understand that we live in a society, a civil society, with the Constitution, these great United States of America. We understand that everyone has fundamental rights in this country. Not talking about life, liberty, and all that, but we're talking about the health, safety, and welfare of the child. We're talking about health, safety, and welfare of the individual woman, and also the people who ultimately in a union, may it sometimes be marital, may it sometimes not be. But at the end of the day, you do realize that it takes two people to consummate, to have that young fetus or embryo or zygote. We're going to go into all the scientific aspects of it, not to drown you in that. But ultimately, I just want to let you know, I'm not here to condemn women and their women's choices and reproductive rights and all that. That's a whole other conversation for another day. We can definitely talk about it. They're very valuable. But at the end of the day, this is more not even bioethical. It's not bioethical issues at all. What it really is about is, when is conception? If you really look at it from a legal perspective, and I've seen Alito's opinion post-Roe, in the post-Roe world, when the Dobbs opinion came out. I have a lot of different attorneys here who can attest to that. There's a lot of different issues. This is not fundamentally an issue that affects each other in the societies at the societal level, because it's not federal. It's a states' rights issue. The Congress actually decided that, and the government decided that. It's based on our Constitution. We as societal members in this civil society do that. So that's where I'm going to talk about. I know I gave a little tirade there, but here's how it goes into. My argument here today is that abortion is wrong. And, I'm a vegetarian, I don't eat meat and all that. And I want them to use that, because here's the thing. Why do we kill, right? Why do we do things? And words like that, homicide, for example, homo sapiens, right? We're all part of the hom, right? The homo sapien aspect of it, totality of man or woman. And then the side, the elimination. When I was in law school, we learned about the actual processes that takes place when you actually dismember a child, or cells. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's cells. Let's say there's, a body part, a leg, an arm. These are things where scientific journals from Harvard and various other institutions have always showed that if you actually look at it, there's brain waves that are really red at 6 weeks. There's a heartbeat at 3 weeks. Most of these women in here who have children, you've probably felt the heartbeat yourself. I have never. So how can I attest to that? I can't. I'm not here to argue about at what point is a child, considered a child and all that. What I'm talking about is cells. We're talking about ultimately 2 points. We're talking about cell behavior. We're talking about when a woman and a man consummate. And ultimately, a baby is created. I'm going to talk to you scientifically, because scientifically is how we actually prove it with a logical nexus in accordance to the law. So if you look at the science behind it, and when you look at two people who are actually a man who has sperm cells and a woman who has eggs, by the time I've even talked to y'all, just to keep it light, but I've already created 22,000 something sperm cells right now in my my body. Let's be honest, right? And I said that gentleman, they're like, what? But yeah, guess what? The body always finds a way. I will show one thing. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park, when they had the hermaphroditic frogs, the hermaphrodites frogs and all that, they talk about the velociraptors. Life always finds a way. Well, guess what? In humanity, the whole process, I don't have to give sex ed here to talk about, it's just science. Basically, the whole zygote is based on genetic material. If you look at the genetic material, we have to look at what is fertilization. At what point is conception? At what point is this a human being? We can talk about the UN rights and the laws and all that in civil society, but ultimately you have to look at when is a human being. The fundamental argument here is not about is abortion right or wrong. It's actually about when is a life conceived? When does fertilization occur from a scientific perspective? And based on that scientific perspective, how do we as a civil society understand that and dictate that as according to our norms? There's a lot of countries out there who, like Canada, for example, where they actually legalized this whole abortion aspect of it. And guess what? Maternal mortality went up. It's not about the issue of killing a cell or a human being for that matter, but rather about access to healthcare, access to good healthcare. If you've looked at the statistics, the laws don't lie, the statistics don't lie, and we have it all here to prove it. And I look forward to the rebuttal because I'm saving my points for it. I'm going to tell you, there's two ways they abort babies. And I'm not here to ask, about like emotional aspects. I'm talking about what is the cell, what is that little tissue, the fetal tissue and all that. There's two ways they do it. They basically do vacuums when they're under, about 6 weeks or less. I'm sure a lot of y'all are professionals in this, and I'd love to welcome your questions. But either they vacuum the whole aspect of the embryo out, or when it comes down to actually clamping down when it's past 6 weeks or so, now you have the leg and the arm, they will literally take a clamp. I've seen it. In law school, we had to watch abortions actually being done so we could be better constitutional lawyers. And one big thing that we saw was that doctors do this, and they have every right, bioethics again. But at the end of the day, they take a clamp, they go inside the actual zygote, they take out an arm, then they rip out a leg. These are things where you're dismembering, you are literally debilitating a form. We can argue whether it's a life or not, but you are pulling out legs, you are pulling out hands, you are pulling out heartbeats. And mothers that are in this room have probably had children. This is what I mean by it's emotional. Because I guarantee you a lot of y'all maybe are here because you've probably driven someone to a clinic to do that. I've had friends who have gone through that, and I have personally had significant others that have had family members do that. And it's not something we like to talk about in society. It's like texting and driving. We don't go out and say, hey, look, texting and driving. These law enforcement officers out there will probably get us if we're texting and driving. But guess what? That doesn't make those people inherently bad for doing texting and driving. We all agree that it's bad. But at the end of all of it, we empathize with that person who may suddenly text and drive and hit somebody, an innocent bystander, and kill them. But guess what? We empathize with that. We all agree that texting and driving is bad. But we don't prosecute or persecute, that individual because of a decision they made based on circumstances that were outside of their control, based on their personal decisions. And this is all about society and personal decisions. And we all have these decisions. And we can go into the science behind it, we can go into the law behind it, we can go into the Supreme Court precedent that Justice Alito decided on. But all of it just comes back to one thing. What do we as a society understand of not whether the abortion debate is whether it's right or wrong, but when is conception? When do we decide as human beings that this is a baby? And I believe, in my side of the argument, as a pro-lifer, someone who has seen this in my day-to-day as an immigrant and also an immigration attorney, where I have people come into my office who are young women who are of Latino descent or African American descent, wherever they come from. But at the end of the day, it's not about the actual abortion. It's about the access to the health care in those communities. We need to do a better job. This is why I actually showed up on the stage. We need to do a better job to have the conversation so we can hold our elected leaders responsible so they can create policies, not at the federal level, but at the state level. These are state rights. If you look at gun rights, I'm not going to bring all that up, but if you look at gun rights and if you look at all these other issues, it's all state-based. The Constitution has always said that through the 14th Amendment of the United States of America. So I know my time's coming up, but I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Thanks for having me here. I really look forward to having this dialogue, and I welcome your questions, and I look forward to Mr. AJ and I really pushing that needle forward. So thank you so much, and God bless you. Thank you.
AJ, you have 5 minutes for cross-examination.
10-4. Put on my timer. So again, I want to thank you for being here. Again, civil as always, as all conversations should be, but now this is the fun part. We get to interview each other in front of a bunch of strangers, and also friends and family. So I got just a simple question for you. What is your position on rape exceptions for abortion?
So your question is basically, what do we do when we have someone who has either had rape happen to them due to the sexual assault issues or incest or things of that nature? Is that where you're leading with your questions?
I'm just asking if you favor an exception for rape or not.
So I do not, and here's why. And this is where it gets a little bit more, testy. And let me explain why. A lot of people in society go through very harsh circumstances in life, okay? And there's a lot of things that do happen. At the end of the day, there's a lot of social services. We have a lot of different groups, a lot of people. Then there's the kind of argument that ultimately with conservatives or people who, ultimately don't want to pay for the tab or whatever. It's not about that. It's a human life. It's a being. So one big thing is when you have rape or incest, these kind of situations, it's kind of like you're basically stating to the public that because of that horrible incident, and I understand where you're going with this, and we talked about this privately when we met, but when you look at those kind of situations, that's a tough, traumatic experience. That's why we have our law enforcement officers. That's why we have social services programs. That's why we have the court system. That's why we have the judicial process and all of that. Psychologists and psychiatrists. But at the end of the day, I always ask, and I get this argument a lot, and I understand where he's coming from and where he's kind of going with that argument. But here's the thing. We all in society go through very traumatic experiences in life. And it depends, and here's the thing, and I see a lot of your faces, and I get it. Some are not as traumatic as rape and incest. That's very traumatic. But what my point is in addressing this civil issue here, where you're dealing with someone who is going through such hurt, such traumatic, like they wake up every morning and they literally see that person in that sun. Well, I'll give you one little quick 30-second story.
Make it quick, we're running out of time.
Well, I'll make it 30 seconds or less. I had a young woman who came under U visa status. These are victims of crimes that come into they're victims. She was raped, and she actually contracted HIV. And my paralegal is sitting back there, and she knows what I'm talking about here. I'm not doing the attorney-client thing, I'm not telling you the name or anything, but basically, this young woman told me she was going to be suicidal, she was going to kill herself, because unfortunately, she was raped by some gentleman here in Polk County. And our law enforcement officers came and helped. They did their due diligence. They worked very hard. This young lady got pregnant as a result. The young lady wanted to abort the child through Planned Parenthood. She came to my office, and I talked to her. And we don't give medical advice or anything. We just say, look, you were a victim of a crime. You know what she said? She said, I decided to keep the baby because that baby gives me a purpose. It gives me life. It shows that even though these horrible, traumatic things happen, I still get to end up having a child that I get to protect and serve. And you know what? Now I get to see that little kid come into my office as this young little child, and that was easily about to be aborted, and she's smiling, she's laughing, she's happy. It gives me goosebumps talking about it. Because that lady was going to commit suicide, but that one little child has now helped that young lady live a better life, a stronger life, and on top of that, she now has something to live for. And that young child, now they have access to the great education systems here, they get to work hard and do everything they can. So when you say that question, I get where you're coming from, sir, but at the end of the day, it's a day-to-day decision, we understand that, but it's up to the states, it's up to our communities, and it's up to the individual person. We get that, I get your argument. At the end of the day, these people sometimes rely on that baby. That is a human life that is beating inside a womb that is ultimately going to provide value to that individual and create a better family life that we in the great state of Florida are known for, providing good life and good value. So, really appreciate that.
All right, for my next question, and this is a simple yes or no question, do you think minors should be able to adopt minors?
Do you think minors should be able to adopt other minors? I look at it this way. We all are...
Simple yes or no. I'm running out of time.
So, no. And
So-
there is a rationale to that. It's not just a quick question, but would you let your minor get in a car and drive another minor around? I mean,
That's an excellent point. So then why is it okay for a minor to be a parent when they're not adult?
so life is about personal choices, right? And we always, you were expecting that argument, but life is about personal choices. All of us are in Lakeland or Polk County, or a gentleman I met earlier from Haines City. At the end of the day, we have parents. We have something called a familial unit in society and a community. And at the end of the community and the society and everything we do, we have good moral characteristics, we have good values. I'm sure these officers out here wouldn't want some young kid driving around at 15. If you think, I was 15 once, if you think as a minor, you think it's okay for another minor who does not have a financial stability, does not have a brief understanding of the educational values that ultimately ends up getting you to a position where you will then able to support that child, then we're in person. That's a whole other debate. We all know that. Would you allow your minor child at 12 or 15 to even cook lasagna for you in the oven and make sure they turn the thing off, or are they going to get burnt? Should we have other minors adopting other minors then? We all are seasoned folks here. We know what's right, what's wrong. Yes, some people do mature, sooner than others, but that does not mean that, as a society, we should now allow every minor to just suddenly do what they can and adopt other minors because of parental consent rights and all that. We can go into the whole legal aspects of it, but we don't have time for that. So I do appreciate that question.
I believe it's your turn now.
Yes, sir. So actually, your questions, you actually bring up, I agree with you. See, some of the things, sometimes we have to agree. A lot of people will agree to disagree. But sometimes we have to agree when someone else is right too. I do agree with him that it is a public health policy type issue. I'm willing to meet him halfway on that. And I think our Congress members and a lot of our state representatives should also do a better job at actually interviewing young women, and actually the men. Because I know that question I'm going to get from the audience. You're two men, what do you know about it? Well, we're part of that process, right? We as society have understood the rules and addiction that involves us as a society. It's not just women, it's men and women. We've always talked about women's rights, we've had amendments and everything, but at the end of the day, women and men, it takes two to tango. You can't just dance by yourself. I see couples here who love each other very dearly. You can't do it yourself. It takes two people to make an embryo, and I'm not even talking about a baby, I'm talking about embryos and cells. That's all I've been talking about. If you want to make some embryos or cells, it takes two to tango, and that's why men are just as important. So your question, sir, you talk about public policy and the bioethics behind it. I would ask you, you really brought a great point about how public health is an issue. It is something that we need to decide when we decide what is abortion rights. You attacked it from a public health perspective and a public policy perspective. My question to you is, if the pro-choice argument is so strong, what can pro-choicers do then from a public policy standpoint to ultimately alleviate the concerns in our social economy, the public, and all the behavioral issues that go through with young people getting pregnant day to day?
Well, the first step is legalizing abortion. You can look at what the majority of sociologists, economists, and medical professionals have to say about this. They all agree that abortion access actually has benefited society as a whole. Every question that I asked during my philanthropic argument, the answers were negative because we know abortion access does the opposite of the negative. You have less orphans, you have less poverty, you have less crime, you have better mental health, you have less single-parent homes, better economic achievement and academic achievement. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can go see what the Institute for Women's Policy and Research has to say. You can see what the Economic Policy Institute has to say. You can see what the Urban Institute has to say. You can see what the Brookings Institution has to say. Some people don't like Planned Parenthood, but Planned Parenthood actually prevents more pregnancies than they abort. So you can listen to what they have to say. I mean, and you mentioned bioethics in some of your statements. The majority of bioethicists are pro-choice. So if we want to alleviate things, the greatest way to alleviate poverty, to make society better, is the empowerment of women. And the first step to doing that is by being pro-choice and having them have control over their reproductive system. This has been proven. That's why there's no debate when you look at the highest echelons of American intellectual discourse. There's no debate when it comes to this.
So I really appreciate that, and you talked about something very, about human rights, basically. And human rights are rights, right? And human rights fall under an umbrella. I would say human rights are women's rights. women's rights are human rights. They're not mutually exclusive. They work in tandem. I actually serve as a board director for the United Nations board for basically the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedoms. So we look at the human rights aspect of it. So I'm actually looking at it from the Declaration of Rights. I'm looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs that we talk about when we look at young women and women's rights in different countries. Taking into account the United States and also knowing that there's 70 million abortions a year just in the U.S. alone, and looking at it, that's like basically like twice the population of Canada every year that we're killing. And then the rebuttal I see is, oh, well, we have African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, whatever, right? The poverty guidelines and all that was based on the Department of Health and Human Services standards. Well, the UN, if we look at internationally, based on your argument that you just made there, sir, you're basically telling us that ultimately all these statistics go up. Everything's gravy, right? So my thing is, I say based on the stats that I've seen, based on serving on as a lobbyist prior to coming on the stage, being a part of the UN, and understanding the healthcare aspects of it, we like to say that it's the opposite, actually, based on the statistics I've seen, country reports that we do for our immigration clients, and all of that. The UN Declaration of Rights, right, says that a child, by rights of physical and mental immaturity, has rights to special safeguards and care, and before as well as after birth. So ultimately the vulnerabilities, it's kind of that question we talked about earlier, would you let your child drive a car or whatever? It goes back to this. We as a civil society have dictated that no, because that's why there's parents. You already, through a chromosomal aspect and the family-based aspect, from a scientific aspect, not even a moral or religious, but from a scientific aspect, if you really look at it, there's you could have mothers here who aren't mothers, they're mothers to be. But they're about to be mothers once they get pregnant, and the zygote and the sperm and all that. We can talk about all that. But basically, the UN has stated this. There's UN articles. The international law has stated this. That ultimately a child, by physical and mental immaturity, does not have the ability. So there's death penalty laws. We're not going to talk about death penalty, but imagine you have two women. One is pregnant. She committed the same crime. She committed murder. And you have another woman who is not pregnant and also committed murder. These two women, same crime, same country, not taking out the U.S. Well, guess what? Based on the UN standards, the one who's pregnant does not get the death penalty. Why is that the case? Because there's a human being that's living. Let's not even call them human beings to support your argument. Let's say there's cells and embryos. Well, somehow the UN and the Declaration of Rights has stated that ultimately that there are two different people in one body. There's something in there that person cannot die. They cannot get the death penalty. Even if we put aside the death penalty is good or not, that's a whole other debate. But maybe that's a good one for Swan Forums next time. But at the end of the day, why is that one woman, based on the UN Declaration of Rights, that 260-something countries have adopted, why are they not ultimately getting the death penalty? Because there's a human being inside, and instead of taking the clamp and doing the suctions and grabbing body parts, they just decided, you know what, let's just skip the whole thing, we won't give the death penalty. So my question to you is, based on the UN and the international laws and our localized on the state level, what are your thoughts or insights based on international law and based on actual healthcare policies involving dismemberment? What do you think is the best step forward as a pro-choice supporter?
Again, I'm not talking about what is, I'm talking about what should be. So I'm not very much interested in that aspect of the debate. I do know what the majority of sociologists, what the majority of economists, and what the majority of medical professionals in this country say. And they don't side with your side of the position. I also want to make a clarification. My position is not that the fetus isn't a human life. That's not my position. But I will be talking about that in my rebuttal, as I will be tackling the moral case at a more foundational level to systematically deconstruct your position.
It does seem we've crossed over into the rebuttal territory as it is, so let's go ahead with that. Agent, you have 10 minutes for your rebuttal.
Now you'll have to forgive me, as I will actually be reading a pre-written statement for this portion of the debate, mainly because I'm a much better writer than I am an orator. So there's a lot to cover, and I felt that this would be the most efficient way to do it. So at the very heart of the moral debate over abortion rights is the question of what makes us special. What makes us who we are, and what grants us moral worth? The answer to this question is certainly deeper than plain humanism or than the fact that we happen to be alive. In fact, saying that we're special because we are human is really no different than me saying AJ's special because he's AJ. We sort of need to prove it, right? That said, while the answer to this question comes down to specific qualities that matter. And while there are many qualities that make us special, they all stem from the brain. Our personalities, our ambitions, our identities, our moral instincts, our capability and capacity to be moral and rational agents, and so forth. But at the core of these attributes are sentience and consciousness. I'm glad he wants to speak about science because I'm about to enlighten all of you on neurology. So what is sentience and what is consciousness? Sentience is the state or quality of being actively aware of sensations or feelings. Consciousness is the state of being actively aware of one's own existence and surroundings. Being sentient and conscious means that a being has the capacity to actively experience pain and pleasure. It is the basis for what makes us special. It is at the root of what really matters to the human experience. Hence why many philosophers consider it to be the bare minimum requirements for moral worth considerations. In fact, this is one of the reasons why certain animals have rights, because they can actively experience pain and pleasure. So what does this have to do with the debate that we're having right now? The fetus cannot possess these qualities prior to 18 to 25 weeks. The following is a quote from a study that was published in 1991. It's the first study I'm quoting. It is concluded that the basic neuronal substrate required to transmit somatosensory information develops by mid-gestation, 18 to 25 weeks. However, the functional capacity of the neural circuitry is limited by the immaturity of the system. Thus, 18 to 25 weeks is considered the earliest stage at which the lower boundary of sentience could be placed. At this stage of development, however, there is little evidence for the central processing of somatosensory information. Before 30 weeks gestational age, EEG activity is extremely limited and somatosensory evoked potentials are immature, lacking components which correlate with information processing within the cerebral cortex. Thus, 30 weeks is considered to be a more plausible stage for fetal development at which the lower boundary of sentience could be placed. That's just one study. Let's go ahead and talk about another one that was published in 2014. Assuming that consciousness is mainly localized in the cortex, and we have every reason to believe that, consciousness cannot emerge before 24 weeks of gestational age, when the thalamocortical connections from the sense organs are established. Thus, the legal abortion, or the legal limit of abortion at 22 to 24 weeks in many countries makes sense. I'll give you one more study. This one is incredibly recent and is a narrative review of previous studies. And it was published in 2022, I should add. We can conclude that from a neuroanatomical point of view, it is rather unlikely that the fetus can be seen as a conscious human before 24 weeks of gestational age. Thus, before all the thalamocortical connections are established. It may have a heartbeat, but that would mean nothing. It may have working pain receptors, but there wouldn't be anyone there present to actually feel those synapses firing. A fetus certainly is not a moral agent as well, as it possesses neither moral agency or instincts. But this is something we don't need to worry about because sentience and consciousness could be the bare minimum requirements for moral consideration. This would grant value to an infant, but not a fetus. Be that as it may, since the fetus is not a moral agent, meaning it cannot make purposeful moral decisions, it then cannot be stated to be innocent, as the concepts of innocence and corruption or guilt requires moral agency and at a minimum moral instincts, a term that Immanuel Kant termed himself. This is why we do not call inanimate objects innocent. This is why we don't look at microbes and say they're guilty for pissing us off. Anyone who claims that the fetus is innocent is making an appeal to emotion that is based on a false equivalency fallacy that posits that the fetus is like you or I when it is not. According to the CDC, 93% of all abortions occur prior to 13 weeks. As such, most abortions could never be reasonably argued to be unethical. Continuing to exist grants the fetus no benefits it can truly experience, while terminating it doesn't cause it any harm it can actively experience. Termination also does not deprive the fetus of anything, because prior to 18 to 25 weeks, it has no desires, it has no identity, no personality. There is no one there. It may look like us, but it's not akin to us, because it's quite difficult to be a person without a personality. When a pro-lifer states that a fetus is a baby, as my friend here did tonight, they're committing a serious false equivalency fallacy. It'd be no different than me bringing to all of you a basket full of cloth, buttons, and strings, dropping it down on the table and saying, that's a jacket. I don't think it is. There's a reason the term fetus exists. But let's assume you aren't convinced that sentience and consciousness is what matters at the end of the day. I would just ask you to think of the pain and misery that people feel when their loved ones enter a permanent coma. No one rejoices over the notion that that person is still alive on the hospital bed, even though they'll never wake up. No, they mourn because they know, whether consciously or subconsciously, that said person's gone forever. Because what makes you and I special is up in the brain. But let's say you're not convinced yet. Let's look at a simple thought experiment real quick. Imagine that you are in a burning building that is about to collapse. Now imagine that you come across a crying child who is next to a self-sustaining tube that is housing 2 live fetuses that are in a period before 13 weeks of gestational age. Now, you can only save the child or the fetus, because the carrying case is a bit heavy and the child's a bit heavy as well, and everything's coming down around you, the house is on fire. So you can only save the child or the fetus. Who do you save? Do you save the child or the 2 fetuses in a container? Most people would save the child because they know, whether consciously or subconsciously, that the child can suffer and the fetuses cannot. My opponent talked about brainwaves in the fetus at a young age. They're akin to an insect. That's literally what the studies say. I actually have a video on YouTube on it if you ever need the sources, but they're not feeling anything. There's no one there. And most people would choose the child over the case of fetuses because they know that the child can suffer. They know that the child will die an agonizing death, whereas the fetuses will not. They understand the importance of sentience and consciousness. If it were the other way around, people would save the fetuses because 2 lives or 2 people are technically better than 1. It's basic arithmetic, but that's usually not the answer. And people do this because they have a moral backbone, and they have the intuition to understand that it is important. The most important part of what makes us human is our ability to actively experience our world around us. So in conclusion, since the fetus cannot be compellingly argued to be akin to a person, the entirety of the anti-choice pro-life position collapses like a poorly constructed house of cards. I also would like to note that the studies I cited to you are scientific. The facts are not refutable. But what about potential personhood post 25 weeks when the fetus is, arguably meets the bare minimum requirements for moral worth? Sure, I'm willing to have a compromise about that. That makes sense. It's potentially a person at that point. And 24 to 25 weeks also happens to be fetal viability as well, coincidentally. But by that time, being roughly half a year into a pregnancy, an abortion is most likely to take place due to medical complications like an ectopic pregnancy. Most women just won't carry a fetus for 6.5 months, just to abort it willy-nilly, because, I don't like how this looks. I'm done. They're not going to do that. Hence, access to abortion still needs to be legal for that time frame as well. A total ban just isn't in the cards, no matter how you say it. Most abortions just cannot be argued to be immoral, and a total ban is just not something that can be reasonably justified in any scenario. I understand my opponent likes to say that I'm here to talk about legality and not morality, yet he is making moral claims. When he says this is alive, we should care about it, that is a moral claim. This is why I want to focus on what makes us special, because being alive in itself is not special. All right, the sperm cells that are left on hotel bedrooms every night at Disney are alive. They have human DNA, and in the future they could even be used to make clones of people, so they would technically be hypothetical people. I think we need something a little bit more concrete than just, it's alive. Yes, it's a fetus. Yes, it's a fetus. Yes, it's an embryo. Yes, it's human. Yes, it's eventually going to be one of us. I don't think that matters, especially the potentiality argument. How much time do I got left? I got at least a minute? Yeah, I'll make it real quick. When pro-lifers say it's eventually going to be a person, that's dubious reasoning. It's saying that rights trickle down to our early stages of development. I'll give you an example why this reasoning is very fallacious before I yield the mic to my good friend. Case in point, just because a minor's eventually going to become an adult, right? So why don't we just let minors have sex with adults? I mean, that's the argument pedophiles make. That's the argument of rights trickling down to our early stages of development. Clearly, it's not a good argument. Anyways, with that said, I will leave my time.
Thank you so much, AJ. That was very informative. I really want to say thanks again to the well, to everyone here. So, what a day, huh? We had a chance to actually, talk, listen, get to kind of understand each other. But I'm going to stick to my colleague here. He said one thing, and really listen to this, right? What makes us special? We're special because we're human. That's what he said. I didn't say that. He said. What makes us special? Rewind all the videos and all that. What makes us special? We're special because we're human. Not my words, his. What makes someone human? That's what we've been arguing, right? When we talk about what is human, is it a child or is it a fetus and all that? He argued public policy, he had all the statistics, he has all of that. I don't. I'm speaking from basically talking to you as a human being, talking to you as a member of our civil society, talking to you as a lawyer. What I'm going to talk about more is, he said something about basket of strings is a jacket. I don't think fetal tissue or, things of that nature is just a jacket. It's basically a composition of cells that are put together that creates a human being. His argument was also, well, if it's about to be a human being, well then I have that argument where I talk about cell composition and cell behavior. If you look at literally human rights, and we take that mantra of it, human rights, we take family, he talked about consciousness, he talked about neurology, sentience, all of it, sentience, all of it. At the end of all of it, he said, prove it. That was the big thing. Well, we can prove it through science, right? We can prove it through cell composition and cell behavior. So I'm going to break it down in my closing to stick back to the point, science. Science is always truly tested. We all know that, right? And when you look at cell composition and cell behavior, you realize that at the point of fertilization, there's a body, there's something, maybe not a body, maybe a couple of cells, maybe an arm, maybe a leg, and we'll clamp later and pull up. That's fine. But here's what I'm talking about. We're talking about cell composition and cell behavior. What is it made up of, and what does it do, right? So if the whole thing is about cell composition and cell behavior, we look at it in two things. I made that little joke earlier about sperm and eggs and all that. Well, sperm, basically, as we all know, swims up and ultimately penetrates an egg. When it penetrates an egg, now the sperm and the egg ultimately mix. Now you have a zygote. This is all science, and we're leaving a lot of it, all right? But let's say, because of that composition and behavior, now if another cell is to come in, it creates a penetration shield. And women, you all know this. You all have been to the doctors. As a man telling you this, I know I'm going to get that argument a little later, I get it. But let's just take this into account. One cell embryo and the zygote now form, right? Fertilization just began. Now, my argument was parents, as a civil society, we have every right to ultimately help what? For the health, safety, and the welfare of our children. If we think that cell composition, cell behavior, the way they act, and the way they actually form, and if we take into account our civil society and the Constitution and our laws and everything like that, then logically, there's a logical nexus there that science then leads into kind of what mothers do for their children, that fathers obviously had a part in to get that zygote so that that cell composition and cell behavior operate the way they do. The zygote now has genetic material, not only from the mother, so all of y'all are about to tell me, why are you a man up here and talking about that? Well, guess what? Some of our genetic material's in there too. That's what makes it a zygote. It takes two to tango, like I said. So when you have that genetic material, now you have two different genetic materials. But we're not talking about identical twins, we're not talking about chromosomal issues and things like that. When you have two genetic material from two different individuals who create a human life form at the time of fertilization, I'm not even talking about law or morality or religion, I'm talking about straight up science. You can't argue that, it's been proven. Years and years of generational, right? When those chromosomes intermingle, there's something called fusion. Meiosis happens. That one cell now splits into two. And the two cells now split into four. The four now split into 8. And suddenly within that 2-week period, you now have a composition, a little body or something, whatever you want to call it, just for sake of argument. That now is called egg fusion. Now, with the genetic material from both the father and the mother, you now have changes. So we talk about composition, but now you have cell behavior. Now the behavior is changing. The sperm that tries to come in afterwards won't penetrate. Guess what? It stopped it. There's obviously something in there for the body. Its body's a beautiful thing. If anyone who's doctors here, it's a beautiful thing. It stops other sperm from going in because there's already something in there, right? It's kind of like a heart rolling an egg. You know, we'll talk about it, but try cracking an egg then. You can't get anything else in, right? You boil it. It's a crazy example, but basically what I'm trying to say is the whole purpose, even from a morality perspective, is to procreate. It's to create lives through the intermingleness of the sperm and the egg and the zygote. And then fertilization takes place. My colleague here, who's a good friend of mine, we talked about this actually. We actually had coffee together and we talked before even this. That's why it's so simple, because I love the man. He's got the right ideas. We just have different opinions. You know, and that's okay. That's another thing about this whole civil debate is we should have different opinions. I'm just trying to explain the scientific side. He's explaining the public policy side. It doesn't make each of us wrong or right. It just means that we're providing this to the community. But at the end of the day, one cell does grow. It grows, it metastasizes. Genetic material is created. So then the next question is, from a logical perspective based on civil society, then when does parenthood begin? And we look at life begins in fertilization. That's my argument. Well, if fertilization means a sperm and an egg getting together and creating a zygote, I would say that's fertilization, right? And you might say it's maybe a week, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 18 weeks. That's the argument. When does fertilization begin? My argument here is not to discount him. He's got some very valid points. My argument is from a scientific perspective in our civil society, taking both of those into account, when is conception? Conception is fertilization. And based on the motherhood aspect of it, all you mothers, based on what we as a society, as women or mothers and all that, they always have done what? Historically, culturally, societally, geopolitically, everything. It's always been about providing for your children so you can pass on everything in a legacy. If you don't allow that mother to ultimately provide for the health, safety, and welfare of that little embryo, or whatever you want to call it, to even allow it to get to what it's going to be, then at that point, what does civil society then expect from our parents? What do they expect from our significant others? At the end of the day, it's a role in our civil society based on law that parents help their children. I do immigration law. I do a lot of psych evals and all that kind of stuff with these people. At the end of the day, I always ask the mothers, what do you want out of America? I want to provide a better life for my children. Oh, okay. Well, when is a child a child? You know, is it when they're out of the womb, or is it 18 weeks? He said 18 to 25. I say it's when the fertilization occurs. We can argue that. That's actually the real argument. So ultimately, we know that in all across and I'm almost done here. I've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to wrap it up. But basically, we all know as a civil society that child abuse, murder, anything you do to a child when they're outside the womb, we look at that horrifically. That is horrible. If we were walking down the street and some child was about to die, we would feel very bad about that as a civil society. Why? Because we have intrinsic values that our civil society has created. We have human nature to protect each other. We're a tribe, we're a village, all the sociological aspects he was talking about. I agree with him on that. But all I'm saying is, we as parents, if you look at fertilization, the science aspect, then you look at the laws, and then you base on the law, you look at what is an embryo and all that. And then based on what we as a consensus have agreed to as a civil compact or a social compact, that ultimately we do not abuse children, We provide shelter, we provide love, all that kind of stuff, right? The UN Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, now we're going back to that. They have literally said, this is not the same Declaration of Rights I brought up earlier, but the Civil and Political Rights Covenant has literally said, in countries where there's death penalties, and I'll end it at that, when you have that death penalty for a woman who is pregnant, we have these horrible cases of people in Sudan and all these places. We have immigration lawyers here who can even attest to that. The UN Convention Against Torture even says that a life inside, no matter if it's 2 weeks or 8 weeks, it's still a life. And at the end of the day, we can talk all night about whether abortion is right or wrong, but what I say is look at the science. I'm not here to sit here and preach about whether it's right or wrong. I'm just saying look at the science. If you believe that fertilization occurs when a man consummates with a woman, and there is a sperm cell going into an egg, and there's a protective shield because of the way our body and nature and everything medically has been done, and you realize that there's now a growing something, we don't know what it is, right? According to my colleague here, it's not a baby, it's okay. But I agree with that, it's fine. But what I'm saying is, at what point? That's what we need to have a discussion with. I think it's up to our legislators. We could sit here all day and have these conversations. But really, my whole goal out of this debate was actually to get involved with AJ. He did a great job today. I really respect him for it. His family's here, everyone's here, everyone put everything together. But here's the thing. We should take this conversation to DC at the federal level, yes. At the end of the day, it's all up to our governors. It's a state-based issue. And so anyone who says in a post-Roe world era, where the federal government is saying abortion is illegal and it's bad and all that, they never said it was. If you actually listen to the oral arguments of the Supreme Court and SCOTUS, you will know that Justice Alito in the Dobbs decision basically made a point to say that we're going to kick it. It's not really illegal. What we're doing is we're giving it to the states. Now it's up to us to decide as a civil society, based on our social compact and our understanding of the healthcare and science behind all those principles, whether abortion is right or wrong. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I really appreciate this wonderful dialogue. I want to thank my colleague. I want to thank everyone here who made this possible. And let's move this one needle forward, regardless of what's happening on. So thank you.
Okay, I guess I'll have to wrap up the closing arguments. I'll try to take 2.5. Would you like 2.5 minutes? Or? Yeah, I'll take 2.5 minutes to wrap things up. I just want to point out that I never said that what's in the womb is a something. I clearly stated it is, and it is a human life. That was not my argument. There was a lot of talking about what is, but not what ought to be and what the value of all of that is. I never said that we're special because we are human. I said that what makes us as humans special is our sentience and consciousness. So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the moral and ethical arguments that are at play in this debate, and it's quite clearly a reason why the majority of bioethicists are pro-choice. That said, my friend likes to argue that it takes two to tango with a scientific fact, but it's not a scientific fact. In fact, that is not how pregnancies work, because consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy. Now, I'm going to try to wrap this up within a minute and a half, but let's start off with the basics. What does the word impregnate mean? It means to get a woman or a female animal pregnant. It's a verb. It is communicating that an act is being done to somebody or something, not with someone or something. How do pregnancies happen? They happen through the act of insemination. Intercourse doesn't have to be part of that. We know this because artificial insemination is possible. So actually, it doesn't necessarily take two to tango. Truth is, you could consent to sex and then be given a baby you never wanted. That's the truth. That is literally what science says about it. Because if sex was intimately integral to being pregnant, you wouldn't be able to have artificial insemination. That's a fact. To say that consent to sex is consent to pregnancy is like saying that when you go out driving on the road and somebody else hits you with their car, you consented to that. That is pro-life logic. You go out to the road, you accept the risks that someone else might hit you, and when they do, you can't file for claims and press charges. Come on, guys. That's just not logical. And I think we know this intuitively. With that said, I just want to quickly say that it's abundantly clear that abortion rights benefit society as a whole. That's what the majority of sociologists, economists, and medical professors have to say, including around the world. It's clear that the right to life is not the right to a woman's body, and it is clear that most abortions cannot be compellingly argued to be immoral because there's no body technically present when the abortion is happening. The pro-choice position is clearly superior, and with that said, I just want to paint a very quick picture of what society looks like when my friend gets his way. We have a Lakeland woman today, not today, but in town, was refused an abortion. Her baby will die after birth because she was refused this abortion. How is that fair to the baby? The baby could have been aborted and not suffer earlier on during the pregnancy, but guess what? Now that baby's going to suffer along with its mother. A Florida woman was denied an abortion, I believe in Tampa. The fetus died in the womb, but she was forced to go to work with a dead corpse in her body. She went into septic shock and almost died. The fetus is also dead. There was a teen in Paraguay, raped by a family member, impregnated by a family member. Abortion is illegal in Paraguay. She died after 7 cardiac arrests and 1 stroke during birth. But hey, the baby's alive. It will just be raised by a family that was not ready to raise it, and it happens to be related to its own rape, the rapist of its mother. That's great. Women will go to black market abortions. Those are not entirely safe. They will go get pills in Mexico to get abortions. Those pills might not be entirely safe. Orphans are also more likely to suffer from mental illness. They're more likely to commit suicide. Not all find a home, not all find a permanent home, and not all find a safe home. There's going to be more poverty, more crime, less academic achievement, less economic achievement, higher teen pregnancy rates, more tax dollars will be spent as well as a result of all of this. And here's the kicker. If we get rid of abortion rights, women will be investigated during miscarriages to make sure they were not killing the fetus due to fetal negligence. You don't believe me? This state is actively trying to keep track of women's menstrual cycles. You don't think they're not going to do it? That's the world of the pro-life position. And we certainly can do better. This is why I know he likes to talk about the UN. I'm talking about the majority. I gave you about 6 different institutions you can look to get the facts from. This is why the majority of developed countries are pro-choice. There's a clear reason for it. The science is clear about it. By the way, the science doesn't tell us what ought to be, it just tells us what it is. That's why I wanted to talk about what makes us special. But at the end of the day, the facts are clear. There is one position that is clearly superior. And I'd like to thank you for giving me the time of day to speak to all of you. Sorry, I went a little bit over, so we'll just go in a little bit into the Q&A and let you get a closing argument.
So I'm going to do a quick 30-second closing as well, or however you'd like to do it.
According to the agenda, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, yes, I can take my time. Okay, perfect. I'll keep it less than that. I know the time. So once again, I really respect AJ's passion. If we all saw it, he was up here. He was all about it, right? Because he's passionate. These are passionate issues. It goes back to my earlier sentiment that this is emotional. Dr. Sun, I see by there looking at you. You agree. I see it. Because look, how can we talk about something like this without being passionate, without understanding of what a woman is actually going through in that life decision, or what a man is actually going through with that life decision as well? So he actually said a lot of great things. He brought up a lot of great points, but I still believe that the pro-life aspect of it is a little bit more superior as an argument. If we as a social compact or as a society, if we decide to be people who stick to our guns, stick to kind of who we are as a civil society, not these countries where, and trust me, I've been in these countries. We'll talk about it. He said, forget the 2-to-tango. He didn't like that. I agree. I get that. Okay, cool. But his whole thing was about in vitro, and we can talk about all that, the medical stuff, right? But at the end of the day, it's someone's sperm. At the end of the day, it's still one man, one woman, basically putting their genetic material together and creating a zygote. And I do see some heads nodding. If you can find me a man who's willing to do that, then surprise me. Because this is what it's about. It's basically about pregnancy. It is about insemination, like you said. And artificial insemination, all that, it's still someone else's sperm and someone else's egg. And at the end of the day, that's the only way we make babies. At least that's based on my knowledge, so I don't know why I know. But hey, who knows? Maybe with technology, we never know. But based on what I'm saying, based on my limited understanding of this world, it takes a man and a woman to make a baby. And that's what I'm going by. I'm going to stick with that. But basically, he brought up something about like not consenting to a car accident. All right? And I like that argument. I get that a lot. If you go out on the street and someone hits you, you get in a car accident. Trust me, I'm an attorney. I deal with car accident attorneys all day. It's not your fault. You might get some bozo out there who'll hit you, right? But here's what I look at it as: you can't use that same argument with a baby or a child or a sack of cells. Let's just keep it at that, just to keep along the same lines. That sack of cells did not have any consent either. It did not get to decide whether it was made because of, and I understand the whole rape and incest argument. We're not going to talk about that. I'm saying from a perspective of just a male and a female, sperm and egg, that baby didn't have consent either, right? It's kind of like saying, if your baby, there's some abortion doctors I talk to where there's like Down syndrome children, there's things all over. So now what? They want to suddenly abort? Those children do deserve a right to their life. And if we really look at it introspectively, even from an emotional or moral or even religious level, this is the first time I've actually talked about that. Take a deep introspection, look in the mirror. I will always go back to what he said. What makes someone special? It's because they're human. He said that, and he keeps saying that, but it's okay. You rewind it, you'll hear it. And I listen for a living, as well. And one big thing is you have to make sure that what makes someone special. When I walk up to each and every one of you today and I shake your hand, you know what made you special? You're a bunch of cells too. That just happen to grow up, and you got a little more seasoned or whatever. We all are cells. We're all cells if you really look at it that way. But here's the thing: what is the call to action, right? That's kind of what I want to focus on. It doesn't really matter who's right or wrong. I mean, yeah, we want to win and all that. It does matter to an extent. But really, what matters? What's the call to action? How do we, as a civil society, work together, being polarized on different ends of the spectrum? We understand that we all have different life experiences. I've never set my foot in your shoes or your shoes or your shoes. But you know what? That doesn't mean that we don't have an opinion. It just means that we just have walked a different track in life. And whether we be man or woman, we understand that this is something that does polarize us. It is something that ties us all together. And ultimately, it's up to our leaders to make sure they decide to do something about it from a state level perspective, from state rights based on the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. So if you look at it, like, if this is another country, it's a whole other sphere, right? But at the end of all of it, we look at, he said something like, majority of people are pro-choice. Majority of countries are. Well, guess what? He's majority of these countries, and he knocks me on the UN stuff. But I'll be honest about it, I've done it. When you go to majority of those countries, half these people even haven't left Florida, maybe, or Polk County, or maybe they have. But go to these countries, see what these women. I actually toured this morning an abortion clinic, and I also saw the other side, and what they do, and on the other side where they're helping people too. I noticed there's two sides to it, two different sentiments, two different emotional appeals. However, I did notice that when I was working in the State Department and when we went over, and just 10 more seconds and we'll wrap it up, Ms. Allison, thank you so much. But when I went over, the correlation didn't happen. The countries that did have the most pro-choice, as my colleague said, they were the ones with the highest maternal mortality rates. And these are facts. I can send you the UN reports. I will send it to you. But these are facts. But it's not about abortion. It's really about access to health care and supporting our women, supporting local economies to bring people up so young men are not going out there and having unprotected sex. These are things that we as fathers, and that's one big thing we should be providing values to our children. That then prevents it, right, to an extent. But at the end of the day, you're always going to have bad decisions made. It goes back to my texting and driving example in the very beginning. We don't condemn our colleagues because they text and drive, and they hit somebody, and someone dies. We hate texting and driving. We don't hate that person. In the same way, we don't hate the young woman who got that abortion. We just don't like the abortion itself. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate this wonderful topic. I know it's very sentimental, but these are discussions that must be had in our public, and these are things that are very important. I really want to say thank you so much to AJ. It's been nothing but amazing. Please give him a round of applause. He's been amazing. I welcome your questions, and I just want to say thank you so much for pushing the needle forward and bringing our community together. So God bless you all. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
So we do have some time left for questions. If you do have a question for our presenters, you can come over here and grab the mic. First one out. I love it. No hesitation.
No hesitation.
Just tell us your name and your question.
My name is Aaron. My question is for AJ. AJ, your explanation of the benefits of abortion sort of reminds me of somebody trying to look at the positive side of war. And it makes me want to hear what, if you see any negative side to abortion. You think it's something that anyone would want if some other tragedy had not driven them to that?
That's a good question. I'm not looking at it as the benefits to war, because if abortion is ethically permissible, then there's nothing wrong with it. But there are certain health risks associated with abortions, and it would actually benefit society to lower the amount of abortions we're having. The best way to do that is not to remove the right. The best way to do that is comprehensive sex education. So that way people learn how to have smart sex, safe sex, and know what they're doing so that they don't get pregnant at an early age.
You stated that minors shouldn't, adopt other minors, and we need to trust them with driving and cooking. What about the 10-year-olds that get raped or incest and they get pregnant? What do we say? We don't trust them with the stove, but we trust them with the baby.
Who's that for?
I believe that question's for me, correct? What was your name? Josie, pleasure. My name's Trip, Attorney Tripathi. Nice meeting you. Thank you so much for your question. You brought a great point up there. One big thing about it was minors, yes. And it goes back to my original argument that AJ actually brought up as well. We both agreed on it to an extent. The only place that I differed was when it came to, do we trust our children because of the stove example that you used. I'm looking at it more so from a responsibility factor and societal factor. So you brought up a great point. It's a very traumatic experience if you get raped at 10 years of age. That's why we have our law enforcement partners. They try to prevent that from happening. That's why parenting is important, because you stop a lot of the issues, because sometimes things happen. Things do get traumatic, and unfortunate situations happen where people do have to get raped at a young age. But when that happens, right, there's still a human being. And I get the whole, this is where we differ, and I get it, because your solution to that, based on your argument, based on what I'm hearing and respectfully, is that you would rather have that baby also aborted and removed, so that that woman would not have, that reminder of that baby. Of that baby.
No, the child is 10. Pregnant.
Okay.
So there's 2 children actually.
Yes, so 2 children.
There's one child.
Physically, it's traumatic.
Right. So the question, and I get it. So at 10, right, a horrible thing happened.
Yeah.
She what?
She was denied an abortion, and it was another state.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's try to keep the exchange back and forth. I want to say about trying to
Yes.
I want to be fair.
Yes, and I really appreciate that. So to answer, this is very difficult conversations we're having, obviously. I'm not saying one young woman's life is worth more than another. I'm just saying that it's kind of there's another human being in that young child, and because of what traumatic experience that did occur in that one child, that did happen, that does not mean that we should then now abort another child and kill another individual. Yes, one is psychologically getting maimed, but then the other one's getting completely physically dismembered. And my whole thing is, I understand that there's incest and rape and things of that nature that do make these situations very traumatic and very on the gray area kind of thing. But at the end of the day, there's so much social services, there's a lot of help. At the end of the day, I don't think it's from a societal standard. I look at the social compact from a societal social compact standard, and Ms. Allison knows as a lawyer, she understands that there's relations that we have with individuals. There is still a human being, and what we then have to argue then is what is considered human. That was an argument about fertilization, and yes, there's traumatic experiences, but at the end of the day, we then have the society decide is that okay. I don't think it is, because at the end of the day, yes, that traumatic thing happened, but just because it happened does not mean we need to cause further harm to the actual embryo or the fetus or the cell matter, because that could be someone who can save someone else's life, add to the U.S. economy, do good work, and ultimately be a productive citizen in our society. just never know.
Thank you.
But thank you for your question, I really appreciate it. Hope I answered it to this.
A follow-up question regarding that.
Yes, sir.
Only because you mentioned the two pregnant women and then the death penalty, well, isn't that taking life?
Is that what?
Isn't that taking life, the death penalty?
I
So
think
that's,
debate for
so,
another
no,
day.
no, but I'll address it in less than 30 seconds, actually, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Is that okay? Can I have it? So basically, with respect to that argument, I didn't say that it was okay. I said death penalty is a whole other topic in itself, but I'm saying that based on the UN Convention of Law, basically what we're saying is that there's two separate people in the same country that allows the death penalty, but one happens to be pregnant and the other one isn't, based on an international human rights code that goes across 273 different countries. They're basically saying that whoever signs into this international social compact with the UN, that if someone is actually pregnant, then that person will not get a death penalty because there's something inside. Well, I'm not even saying it's a baby or anything. Maybe there's some cells, right? But there's something inside that there's obviously a reason 273 countries have decided that this is something where why should we put that woman to death when she has something in her? And that's all it is. So that example was just about whether there's an embryo or something versus the egg.
No, I understood. It was just a whole, we're fighting that we're taking this life away, but then we're doing the death penalty that's taking life away, even though they.
And I get your question, and it's just a separate, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Next.
Hi, my name is Maria Gallo. I'm an attorney at Legal Aid, and I've been fighting the front line on this case, on this matter for some number of years. I'm actually the judicial bypass attorney in the county and have argued abortion rights for minors. So my question is, and I also predicted the demise of Roe v. Wade in my law school thesis 20 years ago, because it was argued on the wrong principle. However, I have a question on ectopic pregnancies. You have an ectopic pregnancy, the mother's life is almost certain to be, to die. She's almost certain to die in an ectopic pregnancy. What right do we have to go into that medical consultation with her doctor and intrude upon a medical decision with her doctor?
Very good question. As a fellow counsel, I would actually agree with you on that. We don't, and I do agree with you on that part of it. I'm meeting halfway with you. I think that if it needs to, personally, I'll talk to you about personally how I feel about that. Like we said, we always look at the human rights factors of it. And you bring up a great point. I appreciate and support all the work you're doing for the rights of people and the human rights aspect of it. However, when you brought that up, I get it. It's a question where I'm not going to disagree with you. I agree with you, actually, because at the end of the day, we should look out for the right of the woman. Now, if there's certain calibers of situations, right, where sometimes you can't just kill a human being who's actually alive and well and all that. This is just my opinion. That doesn't make me right or wrong. I'm just giving you my opinion of it. But you're absolutely right. The law and the precedent that you've probably been fighting has shown that when a woman's life is at stake and there is an atopic type of situation, then the healthcare codes and HIPAA and everything else surrounded around it allows for the woman's rights to then supersede the rights of that embryo or that child. So in those unique circumstances, look, I'm not that far, I'm just saying, I understand where you're coming from in that question. It's a very great question. But at that point, now you got to look at the human rights of the individual based on our civil compact or societal compact, that ultimately you do have to represent and work with these people who may lose their life if that pregnancy goes wrong. So in that regard, I completely agree with you. Because at that point, you do have someone who will ultimately end up passing, and then it causes further harm to that human being. But I do understand your argument, and you made the point, and I do get it. So thank you so much for that question. If I did meet you halfway, I do agree with you. I do agree with that. And I think most reasonable minds would, and anyone who's reasonable would understand that, look, in those very unique situations, you can even go to like TGH or Lakeland Regional, and they wouldn't even allow it legally. And because we have good policies in place to protect women when those type of atopic type situations occur. So I hope I answered your question.
Next.
Hi, my name is David, and I have a comment and a question. My comment is, I don't believe in abortion for the heck of it. And what I mean is, girl gets drunk, gets pregnant, has an abortion, and trucks up to my dad. I think couples, teenage couples, should be responsible, practice safe sex, abstinence, celibacy, do it for that extent. My question is this, we hear the term rights of the unborn child. So I want to know from either one of you, is that statement of law? Is it in the Constitution of the United States? Is it in the Bible? Where exactly can we find that statement?
Do you want to take briefly the legal side of it, and I can take the Bible?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, let's do this.
Go first.
Absolutely. So, insofar as the Bible is concerned, I used to be a former Catholic. I need to give all of you a disclaimer. I'm actually openly atheistic. I do not believe in a higher power. So that may make some of you dislike me. That's fine, I'm used to it. But I used to be very devout in my faith. I've read the book and I was even educated on it. You can ask my parents, they sent me to a Catholic school. The Bible does not mention abortion at all. None whatsoever. And if you really read through the Bible, you'll see that the case for the pro-life position is actually a bit shaky. Because Yahweh is actually a bit fluid on the concept of being pro-life, depending on what you mean. And I know some Christians like to believe that you just throw away the Old Testament. You can't. I mean, Jesus himself said it. But I do have 2 quotes here to just let you know that Yahweh wasn't exactly always friendly to the unborn. Here's one, for example, from Numbers chapter 5, verses 20 to 21. But if you have gone astray while married to your husband, and you have made yourself impure by having sexual relations with a man other than your husband, and here the priest is to put the woman under his curse, may the Lord cause you to become a curse amongst your people when he makes your womb miscarry and your abdomen swell. That's a divinely ordained abortion. I don't know how else to cut that. I don't see how you could interpret that differently. I'll give you one more example. From Hosea chapter 9, verses 14 to 16. Give them, Lord, what will you give them? Give them wombs that miscarry and breasts that are dry. Because of all their wickedness in Gilgal, I hated them there, and because of all their sinful deeds, I will drive them out of my house. That doesn't sound pro-life, because the pro-life position is arguing that you shouldn't abort a fetus because it is innocent. Its life has value, and to abort it is to punish it for crimes it did not commit. As far as I'm concerned, Yahweh is doing that. And he certainly did that during the Great Flood, and there's just numerous examples that have to deal with this. And I know my friend's going to touch on law, but I just want to put into the fire. As far as the 14th Amendment is concerned, it clearly says born persons, but you're free to opine on that.
So thank you so much. I'm going to address the other side. First of all, I just want to say thank you. You must be very proud of your son, and you're here to support. That means a lot, I'm sure, to him, because he is a human life. Remember, so it's great. I like that. So one big thing I wanted to address is that the legal side. So you actually asked a very good question. Is it in the Constitution? No, it is not. And that's why we have the Supreme Court, and they make these decisions. So she's nodding her head there because she probably listened to the Dobbs opinion, and Justice Alito, who wrote the majority opinion in that, basically stated that there was no, language involving what is abortion, whether it's in the Constitution. That's what the majority opinion said. Yes, we have a supermajority, in the Supreme Court with, a right-leaning, more justice group. But here's the thing: the people on the bench who actually ended up making the laws, they had dictated based on, and he brought up something that was very interesting. He said, oh, well, something that in society sometimes, that's why we don't give everyone the right to just, make the laws and decide what the laws are. We decide based on a republic, not a democracy, but based on a republic. We then realize that these 9 justices are the ones determining the decisions based on case precedent. Well, the Dobbs decision from Post Roe was ultimately showing that. So to answer your question, it didn't say it in there, and that's why they kicked it back to states' rights, and that's why we have hardworking attorneys out there on both sides of the aisle, basically trying to figure out what we can do with abortion rights in this country on a state-by-state basis. Sorry to go a little over now.
We have just a few minutes left.
She padded the schedule. So, AJ, we discussed societal gains after legalizing abortion, and that's fine. We'll accept that all of those gains abortion passed relatively similar to the first trimester, if they got all those gains and they didn't have to go any further than that, how can we justify 18 weeks, 22, and 24 plus after viability, except in the case of the endangerment of the life of the mother, which obviously should be valid. Medical reasons are always trauma. But I just wanted to know what benefit anybody has seen for anything past that 14-week mark.
Well, I can't answer that question in terms of to after that specific time period. I can answer how we justify it from a moral and ethical perspective. And the moral and ethical argument is quite clear. It's something that, again, the majority of biologists agree on. Sentience and consciousness is what makes us who we are. And if you disagree with it, just imagine, just for one moment, just imagine if someone gave birth to an individual without a brain, and they grew up and they matured and they looked just like a person, they technically are a human being. Could you have a person, could you have a relationship with him? Could you be his friend? Would it have any ambitions? It wouldn't be what you and I are. This is why people mourn when someone goes into a permanent coma. I know my friend likes to say that I'm saying we are special because we're human. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we are special because we can actively experience pain and pleasure, because we are moral agents and rational agents. So the way we justify it is that the fetus prior to that time period is not a person. It does not possess the bare minimum requirements for moral worth considerations. I don't see how you justify it. It's alive. Oh, okay. Again, so are sperm cells. When you shave, you are killing human life. You are literally killing human life. At some point, anyone ever hear of a sheep that was cloned not too long ago? Okay, so they did that by getting genetic material. So when you shave and you take a bit of that hair out, that's a potential person at some point in the future. We're going to say that's infanticide? That's immoral? Of course not. There's something deeper and fundamentally more important to what makes us special. And this is the same type of reasoning that has been used to justify animal rights. Animals have rights not because they're alive, because if that was the case, trees would have rights. Animals have rights because, like us, they can feel and experience pain and pleasure. They have personalities. They even have ambitions in their ways. Some wolves and certain animals have moral instincts. So that's how we justify it. We justify it about getting down to the core of what is special about us. Okay, we have 98% of the DNA of a chimpanzee. You're telling me that extra 2% is what makes us special? No, what makes us special is our ability to experience pain and pleasure.
Thank you. We are at 7:30. Are we in agreement to go a few minutes longer to allow for the last couple of questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Jo Shin, and I want to thank you for indeed a very civil and informative debate. And this question is for both speakers. So we've talked a lot during the debate about access to healthcare for women, but the state of Florida has refused continuously to take Medicaid expansion dollars. 60% of children in the state are on Medicaid or Kid Care, which is our version of CHIP. We know that the greatest number of women who access abortion care already have children. Do you think, if there's another abortion ban this year, that the state of Florida is ready to give families the help and they need to support additional children?
Thank you. Tripp, do you want to go first?
So first of all, ma'am, great question. This is something I always talk to the senators about. Senator Rubio actually was the one who put CHIP into place, as you know. And when I go to his office sometimes, we'll talk to his aides and all that when we are at events. And you bring up a great point about our senators and our ability of people in Article 1, basically the Congress, to actually do their job and then let it trickle down to the states through states' rights, right? So you asked a really great question. I just want to make sure I have it here. But your question was, you already, CHIP is already in place, and these types of social programs, the social net that we have. Your question is, if there was to be another abortion ban, something that's going to be more stringent, which I our legislature is probably going to do, as we all know, is the state of Florida going to give to the children back, or to those families? That's your question. So it's more of a state level issue. So I'm not a legislator, not yet at least, but what I'm saying is, we don't know, right? It's up to the legislature to decide that. Now, should they? That's a question we as a society have to decide. We can't sit here, at least on my side of the aisle right now, where I say, hey, look, we need to support these children. We need to make sure that we do good things for them, make sure they're alive, they're going to school, getting the education they need, having the family values and rights. We can't say that, but at the same time then come back and say, oh, we don't have the money to pay for it. You know, a lot of people on the same side of the aisle are going to be like, oh, well, you know, that raises taxes, you know, and then now we have to pay for all. That's not the argument. The argument is if you're going to stick to your guns and say you're going to support these people, these young people who are now babies, then you also got to support the family unit. And the family unit ultimately is what keeps us together as a society from a county level to a city level or even to a molecular level in our own households. We know the impacts of divorce. We understand the impacts of being single mothers, single fathers, and all that. Well, guess what? It comes down now to us as a society to determine whether we are willing to put up our money where our mouth is and ultimately do support those young children who we are saving and not getting aborted. And then ultimately as a social net, kind of like Medicare and Medicaid. We can talk about those two issues as a separate debate or something. I can talk to you about Medicaid all day as a pharmacy guy. But Medicaid does need to come from the taxpayer. We're going to stick to that argument. I think it's up to us as a civil society and a civil societal compact to make sure we take care of our own as these U.S. citizens want. So it's something I believe in, and I think that we need to do that. And I think that's up to the legislators to ultimately decide. So that's my 2 cents on it. Thank you.
Thank you. AJ?
Comment on the situation is that we shouldn't be in this situation in the first place. Abortion should be legalized, it should be codified into federal law. I did look up recently, because my good friend likes to talk about the UN a lot, and the United Nations Moderating Committee has slammed the United States Supreme Court decision of overturning Roe v. Wade, saying it disproportionately affects racial and ethnic minorities from accessing safe abortion. So, like I said, the majority of sociologists, economists, and medical professions are on the pro-choice side. This should not even be a discussion. Women should have this fundamental right, and that's just my view on it.
Thank you. We have one more question? Let's give these gentlemen a round of applause before I ask. Now, in my time, when I was in 6th grade, in the South Bronx in New York, it was required for me to learn about sex education. And my mother had to sign these documents in order for me to receive this type of education. Now, this class was not going to show me how to have sex. This class was to show me how to avoid situations if I was to have sex. Mind you, I was 11 years old. And it's interesting that one young lady, once she turned 12, had sex with the boy that was sitting in front of me. And guess what happened? Even after we went through 6 months of this class, she knew exactly what she was not to do. She knew exactly what she was to do. Yet she became pregnant. So my question here is, it's not only to give the woman the right, the choice, but what about giving a parent the choice to making sure their children are educated at the public school system or private school system, especially when we have a government right now that is wanting to ban basically everything that we learn. How can we get rid of that and better the situation for our youth?
Can we just quickly rephrase the last part of the question, if possible?
I want to know why the school system here is being policed by a government, a state government, that doesn't want our children to learn about certain things that have to do with their body. What can we do now to make sure that our children don't become 10-year-old pregnant moms? Or I want to know what can we do with the state, because I'm getting sick and tired of the state, It's not getting tired of the state, not letting our kids be kids. And so tell me.
That's it. You go out and vote.
Not only vote, but who else do we have? I mean,
because
We have to spread the message around.
Good.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many people are talking, no one goes out to vote that day.
That's right, they're not going out to vote. And our kids are the ones that need this kind of guidance, you know?
So I'll address that part as well. And I guess the other side of it, you know, we got the peanut gallery always, but I'm here to listen. I'm here to listen. But here's what I'm saying: we have one of the best governors in the state. And here's why I say that. I know. But here's why. You said something very important there. Let our kids be kids. Let our kids be kids. You also said something also. Let parents decide the choice to decide what they can do. You said that, not me. You said those two things. That's exactly what our governor's doing. And it's not even the governor, it's just society, our school boards, our groups, everyone's basically saying one thing, right? Let children be
But the
children.
governor is not really giving me the right to do what I need to
So
do.
let me address
Because I
that.
want my kids to learn at the school level.
Let's keep the
Okay.
back and forth.
Yes, I'm just gonna answer your question, but I would love to speak with you privately about it after, and
Right.
just kind of let you know that you actually said the right thing. The school system doesn't want us to learn about our bodies, right? Well, children at that age, it's up to you as parents. You get to decide. You said parents have the choice to decide. We're giving the power back to the parents, not the government. That's usually how it is. And you were basically saying that. So I
always
actually,
have that power.
yeah, we always have it, right?
We always have to sign those paperwork for them to get that education. So if this is actually taking something away, he's not giving us.
So to
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we can talk about this at the end of the day. I would like to, one at a time, and respect Mr. Tripathi for being here, keeping things cordial and civil. We could have gotten a whack out for all we know. We got somebody.
I am
I'm trying to defend you right now. But anyways, sorry about that.
Did you finish your point, Jim?
Yes, ma'am, I did, thank you. And I would love to talk to you personally about it, but I do appreciate and respect your comments, and thank you so much.
We are out of time. We thank you both so much for your participation. Thank you to all of you for coming out. Thank you to the